Today we're going to look at me verbs. There's actually no reason why we should have been looking at these verbs at the very, very end of 2 semesters of study. However, that's the way most grammarians do it. The fact is, some of the most common verbs in Greek used the most often are me verbs. You've already come across them many times. There is nothing to be scared of. Although I do believe that me verbs were set up by grammarians to scare students. There's nothing about the verb that you do not already know. For an excellent overview of me verbs that is clear and removes any idea of difficulty, see Ken Sheck's excellent video at the following address. In the meantime, I will attempt to continue the Greek grammarian tradition of scaring students. Me verbs. Greek has 2 forms of verbs. Verbs with an omega ending in the first person singular, which we've seen a lot of, luo, and verbs with a me ending in the first person singular. So, me verbs are all about the endings of the verb. And these are very old endings. We've seen them already. In fact, me, one of the most common verbs that we use, me estin, is a me verb, tell by its ending. There are 3 classes of me verbs. The first has a reduplicated stem plus me. Examples are didωμι, I give, τίδωμι, I put, and histωμι, I stand. As I said, these are extremely common verbs. The next type is a stem plus me directly, no reduplication. And one of these is εἰμι, I am, and αφίεμι, I let go. The final one is a stem plus noumi. Example, δεικνωμι, I point out. Each verb has a thematic vowel that reveals itself in the plural, and we're going to see this. We're going to look at the me present active conjugations for the thematic epsilon, omicron, and alpha. First one we look at is τίδωμι, and it's an epsilon thematic, and its stem is theta epsilon. First singular is τίδωμι. This is reduplication with the voiced version of the first consonant of the stem plus iota. And we're familiar with this because the same thing happens in the perfect. When we put on a reduplication, if the first consonant of the stem is voiced, then the reduplication begins with an unvoiced form. The epsilon thematic expands to eta in the singular. So we get τίδωμι, τίδες, and τίδεσιν with a movable nu. τίδεμεν, in the plural, the epsilon thematic is retained. So we get τίδεμεν, τίδετε, and τίδεασι. Δίδωμι is an omicron thematic with a stem of da. So we get exactly what we got with τίδωμι. We get, except the expanded is an omicron which goes to omega. So we get δίδωμι, δίδος, δίδωσιν. In the plural, the vowel is not expanded, so we get δίδαμεν, δίδατε, δίδασι. Finally, histωμι is an alpha thematic, and its stem is sta. So we have with the first singular, histemi. Now, the reason that we don't have systemi, which you would expect because we should have reduplication of the first consonant of the stem, sigma is a sleazy consonant. It's slimy. So it often softens, and usually softens just to an iota. In this case, it softens so we have a iota with rough breathing. So we have histemi. Histes, histesin. Once again, in the plural, the alpha does not expand, so we have histamen, histate, histasi. And the reason that we don't have that alpha here, which is our thematic vowel, is that an alpha beside an alpha merges to an alpha. So we get histasi. Mi, middle passive verbs. The forms of the verb are absolutely consistent. Both singular and plural have the short forms of the thematic vowel. All the way through, we just have thematic, no expansion. The second person is fully expressed with the original sigma. We had that with the perfect middle passive. Remember, we have psi, and usually the sigma falls out between vowels and the vowels merge. So, the me verbs in the present middle passive conjugations. Tithemi, tithemai. Wow, middle passive. So we have the thematic vowel expressed and primary middle passive endings. Tithesai, the sigma is expressed in the second singular, so we get a wonderful consistency here. And tithetai, so we have tithemai, tithesai, tithetai. The plural, there was no expansion in the singular, so that's identical to the singular. Tithemetha, middle endings. Tithesta and tithentai. Beautiful, right? Didomi, we get didomai, didasai, didatai, plural, didametha, didaste, didantai. And histemi, we get hista, the alpha here, histamai, histasai, histatai, histametha, histaste, histantai. Consistent? Me verbs in the future. The future stem loses reduplication. So we get dido goes to do. That's all we see. We don't see reduplication anymore. The same endings as a future indicative with the expansion of the thematic vowel. Expanded vowel in both the singular and the plural. So didomi goes to doso in the future. Looks just like a future. And that expanded vowel we're very used to because the connecting vowel would expand the same way. Didote goes to dosete. The future active indicative of didomi. The stem is do. Omega, long O. The endings are o, ace, a, amen, ete, usi. These are present active indicative. The formative is sigma, just like a regular future. Sigma is the formative with the same set of endings. The only difference here then is that the stem is different from what the present look like. So we get doso, I will give, doses, you will give, dose, he, she, it will give. In the future, once again, no changes, no expansions, everything's the same. Dosamen, we will give, dosete, you all will give, and dosusi, they will give. Me, aorist, active, and middle. The active loses reduplication. So we had did do, and it goes to da. Has an augment, it's a past tense, and it's usually an epsilon if the word begins with a consonant. So we have edda. The thematic vowel expands in the singular from a to o, so we have edo. And it has the same endings as the perfect, edoka. And it has the same meaning as the omega aorist indicative. The middle, or deponent, loses reduplication, ditto to da, has an augment, it's a past tense, edda, has a short thematic vowel throughout, edda, and secondary middle endings, eddamein, me, aorist, middle conjugations. So we're going to look at dithemi, ethemein is the first singular. Reduplication is lost. The augment is usually epsilon. Secondary middle endings, and the thematic vowel is not expanded. So ethu, and the thematic vowel merges with the final omicron, and we get u. Third singular, etheta, ethemeta, etheste, and ethenta. For diddomi, first singular is eddamein, and the thematic vowel, once again, but this time it's omicron, sigma falls away, and we have final omicron. Omicron plus omicron is equal to u, edu. And then edeta, edameta, edaste, edante. The important thing is that the vowel has not expanded. Histemi, first person singular, estamein, esto. In this case, the alpha merges with the final omicron, and we get omega. Estata, estametha, estaste, and estanta. Me, perfect active and middle passive. The active, the epsilon has a reduplication, dedoka. Thematic vowel expands throughout. The standard perfect indicative endings. It has the same meaning as the omega perfect active. The middle deponent, epsilon reduplication. Thematic vowel does not expand. Primary middle passive endings, and has the same meaning as the omega perfect middle passive. Me, aorist, active conjugations. Dithemi, first person singular. The perfect has the same endings as the me, first aorist. And reduplication here is an epsilon with a reduplication of tau. And the thematic expands to a throughout. So we have tethekas, tetheken, tethekamen, tethekate, and tethekan. Didômi, dedoka, epsilon reduplication. Thematic expands to omega throughout. Dedokas, dedoken, dedokamen, dedokate, dedokan. And finally, histemi, first singular is esteka. Thematic vowel expands throughout from alpha to eta. Estekas, esteken, plural, estekamen, estekate, estekan. The me-perfect middle passive conjugations. Tithemi, tethemi. There's a consonantal reduplication with an epsilon. And we have a throughout rather than the epsilon, which is something you have to remember. And then we have primary middle passive endings. And then the second singular expresses the sigma in the ending, tethesai, tethetai, tethemeta, tetheste, and tethemtai. Didômi, dedamai in the singular, omicron thematic throughout. So we get dedomai, dedasai, dedatai, dedametha, dedaste, dedantai. Histemi, the first singular is estamai, reduplication with the epsilon. Remember the sigma is kind of slimy, sometimes it falls off. Estamai, and the thematic throughout, the alpha. Estasai, estatai, estametha, estaste, estantai. Me present subjunctive. Like all subjunctives, me verbs take primary active endings. The thematic vowel expands, just as the connecting vowel expands for every other form, the indicative. Epsilon and alpha expand to eta. Omicron expands to omega. The resulting present subjunctive looks identical to other subjunctives. It retains its reduplication. So let's look at the me present subjunctive conjugations. Tithemi, titho, look how much it looks like a subjunctive, but it has reduplication, it retains. And the primary indicative endings all the way through, the thematic vowel in this case merges with the subjunctive thematic vowel, and we can't expand it any further. This is unique to the first singular. Once we leave there into the second, we'll see, like everything else, how the expansion is going on. Tithes, tithe, tithomen, tithete, and tithosin. For didômi, dido, didos, dido, didomen, didote, didosi. And histemi, histo, histes, histe, histomen, histete, histosi. The aorist subjunctive conjugations. Tithemi, tho, no reduplication. Thes, they, thomen, thete, thosi. And didômi and histemi are identical. Didômi, do, dos, do, domen, dote, dosi, and histemi, sto, ste, stay, stomen, state, stosin. Subjunctive conjugations of didωμι. The present, reduplication, titho, titho, tithes, tithe, tithomen, tithete, tithosi. The aorist active is tho, thes, they, thomen, thete, thosit. And the aorist passive is tho, thes, they, thomen, thote, thosit. They are identical. Finally, the infinitive conjugation didωμι. The present, didhenai, and the present has the iota reduplication, didensai, didestai. Same endings that we've had before with the infinitive. First aorist, thenai, thestai, thenai. And the perfect, tethekenai, the perfect has the epsilon reduplication. It is a perfect. Tethestai, tethestai. So, the present active tithenai is present, so it's continuous, and it is to be putting. The aorist active of thenai is undefined, therefore to put. And the perfect active tethekenai is a perfect, to have put, but remember, the perfect means completed in the past, continuing into the